Hi, my name is Melissa Carlson, and I am the OnFarm Research Coordinator for the Minnesota Wheat Research and Promotion Council. Today, I'm going to explain a little bit about what Minnesota Wheat's OnFarm Research Network is for those of you who may not be familiar with us, and then I'll give a summary of the two of the on-farm trials that we conducted from 2017 through 2019, looking at sulfur applications in wheat and variable rate nitrogen applications in wheat. The On-Farm Research Network is funded in part by Minnesota Wheat's checkoff dollars and also by research grants with our partners, the Minnesota Soybean Research and Promotion Council, the Agricultural Fertilizer Research and Education Council, or AFREC, and the MDA's Crop Research Fund, or their Agri grants. The sulfur and variable rate nitrogen projects discussed today were funded in partnership with AFREC. The goal of our on-farm research network is to take some of the treatments that small plot university production research has shown to be useful and to scale it up into a real-world setting using farmers' equipment to apply treatments and harvest the trials. This allows farmers to test out new products, ideas, or university recommendations in a field-scale setting on their own soil in a controlled way. Following one of our on-farm research protocols also allows their data to be combined with other farmers' trial results from their area so that we can analyze multiple locations over multiple years in a relatively short amount of time and arrive at more reliable results than data from just a single trial location at a single year. The on-farm trials have very simple layouts, comparing only to 2 to 3 treatments at most, that are replicated at least 3 to 4 times within the field. Having the treatments applied in replicated, randomized plots is important so that we are able to use statistics to understand whether or not the treatments are having an effect on crop growth or yield. If a field is split with only one half of the field receiving a particular treatment, it will basically just be a demonstration plot, since you wouldn't be able to use statistics to know for sure if there was or wasn't a treatment effect. Our on-farm plots are applied with the farmer's equipment, so each plot is usually 1 to 2 passes wide of whichever implement is being used to apply the treatment. In the end, we want the plots to be wide enough so that we can harvest one full header width of the combine from the center of each plot without sprayer tracks. The grain from the harvest passed through each plot is weighed in a weigh wagon or a calibrated grain cart with a scale, as you can see in the top picture there on the right. And the grain is sampled from the auger stream as the grain is unloaded into the truck so that we can measure harvest moisture, test weight, and protein content for each plot. Minnesota Wheat's on-farm research network has been conducting various wheat production trials since 2012. In the past, we have tested the use of sulfur fertilizer, variable rate nitrogen applications, applying an in-season plant growth regulator to reduce lodging, and top dressing wheat with UAN at the boot stage. Projects that we are currently working on and testing are looking at wheat seeding rates for various varieties, applying a fungicide at the flag leaf stage, nitrogen stabilizers for anhydrous ammonia and urea, on-the-go protein mapping with combine-mounted protein analyzers, elevated P and K fertility over the long term, over 4 years of a wheat and soybean rotation, and also green seeding soybeans into a living rye cover crop that had been established the previous year following wheat harvest. Today, I'm just going to talk about our sulfur and variable rate nitrogen projects, but information on the other projects can also be found at our webpage at minnesotawheat.org. That link will be available at the end of the presentation. So the first trial I will talk about is our sulfur fertility trial. Because sulfur deficiencies have been increasing in northwestern Minnesota and North Dakota, more noticeably in corn, but also in wheat over the past few years, the On-Farm Research Network partnered with AFREC to conduct large plot on-farm research trials comparing AMS in wheat in the spring with a control treatment of no added sulfur or no added AMS. The on-farm trials took place at 15 locations from 2017 to 2019. Ammonium sulfate was broadcasted at 100 pounds per acre in the treated strips compared to the no sulfur control, and 3 to 4 replications across the field. The nitrogen was balanced with urea between the treatment and control, so that way each treatment received the same amount of nitrogen. Individual plots were typically 140 feet wide, depending on the size of the spreader, and ran the full length of the field. At harvest, yield was measured by weighing one pass of the combine through each plot in a weigh wagon or grain cart with a calibrated weight scale. Grain was also sampled from each plot to measure moisture content, protein content, and test weight. In 2017, we had 3 field locations near Ada, Detroit Lakes, and Mahnomen, Minnesota. The tables here show test weight, protein content, and yield for the sulfur treatment and control at the 3 locations, both separately and when combined across locations. In 2017, the test weight for the sulfur treatment was 1 pound less than the control for the combined locations. Protein content for the sulfur treatment was 0.2% less at Mahnomen, but there were no other differences in protein at the other locations or when combined across locations. There were no yield differences between the sulfur treatment and the control. In 2018, we had 8 locations. The varieties used in the soil organic matter for each site are also shown in the plots on the right. Here we can see there was a slight decrease in protein content with the sulfur treatment at one location near Mentor, but otherwise there were no other differences in either protein content, test weight, or yield at each of the individual locations or when combined across locations for 2018. One hypothesis that we had for this lack of sulfur response in 2018 was that a warm spring might have resulted in enough sulfur mineralization from the soil organic matter to supply the crop's total need for the season. We had a mix of light and sandy soil types among the locations. However, none of the sites had less than 2% organic matter. In 2019, we tested sulfur at 4 locations. 2 of the sites, Roseau and Salo, I should say Roseau 1 and Salo, had no prior history of sulfur fertilization prior to this experiment. The site near Salo was located on very sandy ground and benefited from a 6.6 bushel yield increase from the sulfur application. However, the Roseau 1 site, which also had never received sulfur prior to the experiment, did not respond to sulfur application. When combined across environments in 2019, there were no differences in yield or grain quality between the 2 treatments. We looked at each year individually, but now we can look at each of the years combined, so all location experiments combined across all years. We did not find any differences in yield or grain quality between the sulfur application and the control. We also noted that even though some sites had low sulfur soil tests prior to the experiment, those sites did not respond to sulfur application. However, that's not surprising, since soil tests for residual sulfur can be influenced by other factors within the soil, and so the sulfur soil test isn't exactly a very reliable test. Research by Dan Kaiser at the University of Minnesota has previously shown that soils with more than 3% organic matter are unlikely to respond to sulfur fertilizer. We saw this in our data as well. However, even at the sites that were in the 2% organic matter range did not respond to sulfur. Unfortunately, we were unable to find any sites that had less than 2% organic matter for this trial. One thing to note, because of the way these on-farm trials are harvested, taking a combine pass through the full length of the field, we're not exactly able to discern if there are smaller localized responses within the field to sulfur fertilization that could be located on either small knobs or small depressions within the field. In lieu of the whole field suffering from a sulfur deficiency, some of those smaller localized areas might be suffering from sulfur deficiency. So I don't want to say don't fertilize your wheat with sulfur, but maybe we can say from these results that sulfur may not be as important for boosting wheat productivity as it might be for other crops like corn or canola. A small amount of starter fertilizer containing sulfur in the spring might serve as good insurance against the sulfur deficiency, especially on light sandy ground, should you be hit with wet weather conditions that favor leaching of mobile sulfate out of the root zone. So now we're going to switch gears from sulfur to nitrogen. As a part of this same grant funded by AFREC, we took a broad look at comparing a variable rate nitrogen application to a standard whole field flat rate application in wheat. You can see an example of one of the field maps on the right, where the whole field received a variable rate nitrogen application with 3 plots of the flat rate application overlaid in the application map. Each map contained 5 zones, with the middle zone being equal to the flat rate nitrogen rate. There are lots of different strategies for making variable rate application maps, and the strategy used here for this experiment was to reallocate nitrogen from the 2 lower productivity zones in the field to the 2 higher productivity zones in the field, to try and save nitrogen from from the lower productivity zones where it likely was not going to be limiting yield in those areas, and move those into the higher productivity areas of the field where nitrogen might be the limiting factor there to hopefully boost yield. Yield maps were collected after harvest, and additionally each plot was harvested in the traditional manner by weighing a combine pass from each strip in a weigh wagon and sampling the grain for moisture and quality. Most of the sites had just the 2 treatments, the control or the flat rate field or the flat field rate of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, compared to the VRN or variable rate nitrogen treatment, which had variable rates of nitrogen held at flat rates of P and K. 2 of the locations tested also included a 3rd treatment in their experiment that applied variable rates of N, P, and K. The maps were all created by the farmers, each individual farmer's crop consultant, using the consultant's best management practices. When examining the yields measured in the weigh wagon that averaged the yield of each treatment across all 5 zones within a strip, for the duration of the experiment, there were generally no differences between the variable rate nitrogen treatment and the flat rate control. We also measured the residual soil nitrate within the zones of each plot for each of the locations in the last year of the project in 2019. The 2 lower productivity zones were combined into one low productivity zone, and the 2 higher productivity zones were combined into one high productivity zone, so that 3 soil zones were sampled within each plot. Residual soil nitrate varied widely among the productivity zones between each of the treatments at each location. However, there were no significant differences in these zones and treatments except at the Kirksten site. At Kirksten in 2019, there was a significant 5.5 bushel yield increase due to the variable rate nitrogen treatment. This site also had a significantly higher residual soil nitrate level in the high productivity zones compared to the control. So since this site was a little bit more interesting to focus in on, we'll look at a few maps from this site. For background and context, this is the original variable rate application map, cut out so that we're only looking at the plots. The plot outlines might be a little bit difficult to see, but you can see that the variable rate nitrogen, or the VRN plots, are outlined in blue, while the flat rate control strips are outlined in red. The 5 productivity zones are colored so that the lowest productivity zone is red, and the highest productivity zone is green. So here is the actual nitrogen rate application map, with the middle zone, or zone 3, equal to the whole field flat rate nitrogen rate, which was applied in the control strips. So here we have the yield from the yield map summarized within each productivity zone within each individual strip. Here, I've highlighted a few interesting areas where it appears that the variable rate nitrogen treatment did appear to give the yield a boost within the particular productivity areas or zones in the field. To summarize it on some charts, yield was about 5.5 bushels higher in the VRN strips when averaged across zones. This appears to be a cumulative effect of greater yield from the higher nitrogen rate in the medium to high productivity zones. These zones received 13 to 30 pounds more nitrogen than the flat rate treatment. There was about a 60-pound overall spread from the low to high nitrogen rates for this particular field. Here we can see the residual nitrate at this site broken out by zone, and the actual nitrogen rates used in each zone listed there on the right. It appears that about 20 pounds of nitrate were left over, which might imply that the wheat only used about 10 pounds of the extra 30 pounds applied to the green or the high productivity VRN zones. While that field was a little more interesting to dive into, when we examined the yield data from the harvested strips that we went over previously, overall, we did not see a difference between the variable rate and the flat rate nitrogen strips. Unfortunately, we only sampled residual soil nitrate in each of the zones in the final year of the experiment. A zonal yield map analysis and pairing residual soil nitrate data with the yield maps for each of the years may have been more informational than only looking at the harvested plot data alone. Some food for thought that I will leave you with is this. Are different methods for creating the variable rate maps more beneficial than the reallocation method that we used in this experiment? We kept the overall nitrogen rate the same between each of the treatments, but maybe it would have been better to cut the fertilizer back in the low zones and simply maintain the nitrogen rate in the high zones. Or perhaps the converse of that would have proved to be better, putting more nitrogen on the lower productivity areas and less nitrogen on the higher productivity areas. These methods are things that should be examined in the future, and if you'll be joining with us for the live Q&A for the Nutrient Management Conference on February 16th, I'd love to have a discussion about different methods for variable rate nitrogen application maps. With that, I would like to give a big thank you to our research partners, the Minnesota Wheat Research and Promotion Council, and AFREC, the Agricultural Fertilizer Research and Education Council, for funding these projects. Credit also goes to Dr. Dave Grafstrom from the University of Minnesota Magnuson Research Farm for his assistance with the Sulfur trial, and to Dr. Rob Prue from the University of Minnesota Kirksten for his assistance with the variable rate nitrogen trial. Thanks also go to Lauren Prue, my predecessor, who played an integral role in getting these trials applied and harvested. If you have any questions about the data presented here, the reports are posted on our webpage at mnwheat.org. Or you can reach out to me at mcarlson@mnwheat.com or leave a message at my numbers listed there on the screen. If you will be tuning in to the live Q&A session during the 2021 Nutrient Management Conference on February 16th, I will be able to answer your questions live over Zoom then as well. Thank you.